Happy to be here. It's an honor to be here, and I'm looking forward to it.
The honor, I can speak for Lau and myself. It's all ours. Thanks a lot for taking the time, man. And also thanks a lot for taking the time, even when you lost your voice. So it's greatly appreciated, man.
Absolutely.
Very, very well. So let's begin into this super interesting topic. For anyone who is joining us, I'm gonna go a little bit Spanish here. Para todos los que nos acompañan y no tienen ni idea de quién es Nick, pues bueno, si conocen el equipo de 3DMJ, ya saben de Eric Helms, de Alberto Núñez, de Jeff Alberts, pues bueno, él es parte del equipo de 3DMJ en la parte específicamente de rehabilitación. Así que como comentaba Lau al inicio, vamos a estar platicando un poquito acerca de, pues, qué es el dolor, cómo lo podemos gestionar y sobre todo acá en este lado del charco, en México, cantidad de mitos que existen. Don't sweat it, Nick. I'm not talking ill about you. I'm just giving you a brief presentation for the people that don't know you and about the topic we're gonna cover today, man.
I've had a lot of introductions, and that one was definitely the best.
Oh man, thank you a lot. So, Lau, I don't know if you want to begin because you sent me a lot of great questions, and I think the first one that Lau sent me directed to you, Nick, I think it's quite the banger. So I let Lau herself take it from here.
Thank you, Danny. Well, as Danny said, Nick, we want to talk about what's pain, what does it mean, and basically how to navigate it through training, because we know during our lifting careers, we're gonna experience pain at different times across our lives. Even if we don't lift, we know people experience pain as part of their regular lives, but sometimes can be scary, sometimes it can be difficult to decide what to do, especially because we know that happens everywhere, but Danny and I think in Mexico, there's no so much education about pain and pain management, and that sometimes can scare people away from lifting weights and becoming stronger. So as an introduction for the topic, I'd like you to ask you, what's pain? What does it mean? Basically, that's the beginning of our discussion.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's an area that I think almost like how the muscle and strength pyramids should be required reading for any new lifter. I feel like this conversation about pain should also be in that conversation, because, like you said, it's pain is different for everyone. It's an experience, and someone who is passionate about exercise and weightlifting, and it's not just a hobby. It's who we are, down to our core. Pain and injury can threaten that, and that's not a good feeling. There's a lot of information out there on pain and injury. Like anything else, there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of disinformation. So there are a lot of people out there doing the best they could and putting out information that may not be quite accurate, but they're doing their best. There are other people out there that are trying to sell things, and just like in fitness. So when it comes to pain, it's important to realize that it doesn't always mean something is damaged. Doesn't mean something is torn. It doesn't mean something is broken. Pain is a sensation that we feel, just like hunger, just like thirst. Pain is something that we feel, and the goal in life, but also in lifting, shouldn't be to be pain-free. That's not really feasible. We're going to have pain every once in a while, just like the goal should never be hungry or never be thirsty. We're going to feel those things, but it's the way that we interpret it that matters. So if we feel hunger, we know that we're probably not going to starve to death. We know that it's just a sensation, and it's our interpretation of that sensation that helps us move forward accordingly. If I eat breakfast and then go walk near a bakery and I smell freshly baked bread and pastries, I may feel that sensation of hunger, but I know that I'm satiated. I just ate, but I still feel that hunger. So that sensation doesn't always equal or I guess the stimulus that triggers that sensation doesn't always mean we're starving. Just like pain. Pain doesn't always mean that something's broken or something needs to be fixed. Um, with something like a common injury would be like a shoulder pain, right? Um, just because someone has shoulder pain doesn't necessarily mean that their rotator cuff is torn. We have good evidence that shows us that asymptomatic people, so people with no shoulder pain, can have imaging done, and we can see tears in the rotator cuff, tears in the labrum, just kind of like the cost of living. We live on planet Earth, and things will happen to our bodies, but our body is able to adapt to those things. Just like in the lower back or in the neck, things like herniated discs. Those are seen in asymptomatic people quite often. So the issue becomes when someone develops pain and they get an MRI or they get an X-ray or something, and the image shows some kind of abnormality, whether it be the disc, whether it be a rotator cuff tear, and then all the focus goes on that structure. When really we need to really just take a step back and realize that that doesn't always equal pain, and that people can have these things without pain. So the way that I approach pain and injury is first we want to see how it started and what kind of things make it worse and what kind of things make it better. So how it started, if we have a mechanism of injury, if we know we went down too far in a bench press and we felt a sharp pain and we couldn't lift the bar up after that, that's pretty clean cut. We probably heard it in that moment. But that's rarely the case. Usually what I see are the people who have had some pain over the course of a few months. It was kind of nagging, but never really too bad. And over time, it just got worse and worse and worse. That's usually the pain that we see in the weightlifting population. So it's important to first rule out red flags. Want to make sure there's nothing serious going on in there. Want to make sure that some shoulder pain when you're bench pressing isn't really a tumor, God forbid, growing in there, and we just think it's probably going to go away, or something like a fracture or an infection. So all those things we want to rule out first, and we do that by asking questions and asking the right questions. So something that would be more of a red flag would be uh, pain that is constant, pain that we can't reproduce, we can't relieve with anything. There may be some numbness and tingling going down the arm. There really is no mechanism of injury. We don't really know how it happened. It's this dull, achy pain that just doesn't really respond to anything. Most of the time, people will be able to say, yep, when I lift my arm out to the side, that's when I feel it. Or they'll say, when I reach across my body, that's when I feel it. And they'll say, it's not constant. There are times when I can walk around and I don't feel pain. That's perfect. That's what we want to hear. We want to hear that there's some kind of trend of when we feel the pain, when we don't feel the pain. When you're out of the gym and you're at work, this thing isn't like throbbing and preventing you from working. So as long as we have some consistency in the symptoms, that's a great thing. If there was some kind of car accident or someone fell and hit their fell and hit like their tailbone on the ground really hard, then I would want to maybe rule out some kind of fracture. We don't want to have something underlying like that, and just kind of treat it conservatively. Those are very rare. I think I can count on half a hand how many times that's happened in my career, and thank goodness, that's probably a good thing. So once we've ruled out those red flags, we see what makes it worse and makes it better. So is this something that is painful when you leave the gym? So it feels great to train, but then afterwards there's like this lingering pain? Or is it something that feels okay when you're not at the gym, but it hurts as you're moving it? That's very important. That's going to change the way that we approach this thing. If it's that situation where you're having pain after you train, usually I look to things like recovery, overall volume, Has anything changed in your training? Are you pushing the intensity? Are you pushing the loads? Have you been sleeping? How is your stress management? Are you in a caloric deficit? What's things outside of the gym like? And those questions are asked all the time, but more importantly, when it's this pain outside of the gym, it just seems like we're not able to recover from the stimulus that we've thrown at it at the gym. If it's in the gym and we can reproduce the pain with certain movements, that's perfect. Because now we can play this game of modifying our training around the pain. So one example could be if someone has pain with bench pressing. Um, my questions would be, when do you feel it? Do you feel it at a certain point of the range of motion? Do you feel it with a certain load? So your warm-up sets feel great. Your first two sets feel great. And then when you go for your max, that's when you really feel it. Or is it a proximity to failure type thing where it doesn't matter the range of motion, doesn't matter the load, but as soon as you start getting to muscle fatigue, that's when you start to feel it. Those are just some examples of things that we may see when diving into this pain. Um, and in all those instances, we're going to approach it a bit differently. If it doesn't matter the load and it doesn't matter how close to failure you are, you could have just the bar. And if you go down to a certain point, you feel your pain, okay, great. What we're going to do is we're going to try to limit the range of motion. We're going to put a block on the chest. We're going to do it in a power rack or a Smith machine, and we're going to set the stops at a certain point so we don't go down to that painful range. What that's going to do is we're still going to get the training effect. We're still going to fatigue and get that stimulus on our chest. We're still going to go through the motion. We're still going to get good practice doing the movement. A bench press with a block on your chest is almost identical to a bench press without a block. So we're not getting too far from the specificity of the movement, which is the goal. And the problem, I think, with physical therapy in general is instead of first trying to modify as small as possible, the first step is usually stop lifting. Bench pressing is bad for your shoulder. Here's this light TheraBand that we're going to do some rotator cuff exercises. That's the last step. So in this instance, in this hypothetical example that we're talking about, if we try this limit range of motion and that doesn't work, it still hurts, then maybe we try dumbbells. That doesn't work. Maybe we try a machine bench press. That doesn't work. Maybe we limit the range of motion on the machine. That doesn't work. Maybe we try isometrics. So we load the machine up with weight that we can't move, and we just gently press into it, and that still hurts. Okay, this is really sensitive right now, so why don't we start with some TheraBand exercises, see if we can get some stimulus into that shoulder, and then we'll gradually work back up those steps that we just stepped down. We'll gradually work back up to those. So that's the instance when you would want to use those banded exercises and things like that. But again, I think the problem is we're too quick to go to those things. And that's like physical therapy, right? It's like you think of rehab and there's like someone there with a bunch of light bands, and meanwhile the person can bench press 315 and it's not getting enough stimulus to their shoulder. So if, back to this example, if the say the block works, limiting range of motion works, they're able to press heavily and go to failure without any pain. Perfect. So now how do we get rid of the block? Because the goal isn't to have a block on your chest for the rest of your life when you bench press. So we would ride that out for a week or two, understand that we're still getting a great stimulus, so we're not in any rush to get rid of that block. And then gradually, I would say, let's do the first 3 sets with the block, and that last set, we'll take the block out and just kind of explore that range of motion. If that feels good, maybe the next week we do 2 and 2. 2 sets with the block, 2 sets without the block. Then we just gradually work back into it, knowing full well that it's never perfect. Things are going to happen. People are going to have stress outside of the gym. People are going to get bad nights of sleep. And sometimes the pain can come back. Sometimes it can feel good. So we're going to take every bit of data with a grain of salt. And we're not going to really put all of our chips in the table with any certain week. We want to make sure that we have some good consistency over the weeks before we start getting rid of our modifications. So that's kind of the process that I usually take. And if it wasn't a range of motion thing in that example, and maybe it was a load thing. So when the load gets to a certain amount, maybe 8 to 12 reps feels good, 12 to 15 reps feels good, but then like 6 to 8, that's when you start to feel it. Then we would take a very similar approach. We would just avoid those heavy ranges of motion, get a good training stimulus outside of that painful range, and then gradually work those heavier loads into it. If it's the proximity to failure type thing, then we just take the sets a bit away from failure. We can use things like rest pause so that we go maybe to 3 reps left in the tank, rack the weight, bring it back up, do 1 or 2 with a few reps left in the tank, put it back up, go again with another rest pause. So we're kind of hitting fatigue, but we're not just pushing right to fatigue. So that was kind of a long answer, but that's generally how I approach these things. First, we want to rule out red flags, first and foremost. Then we want to see if there's pain, when the pain happens. Is it in the gym? Is it outside of the gym? What makes it better? What makes it worse? And then we gradually regress that movement pattern. We only go as far as we need to and no more than that. We want to stay as specific as possible to the goal movement. And then we gradually work back into it, never in a rush, taking our time. And then in some instances, I will prescribe some classic, I don't really like the word mobility, but sometimes I'll give someone a bit of a home exercise program. Maybe it's if it's the shoulder, maybe it's some mid-back, like thoracic spine mobility, some different stretches, things that take less than 5 minutes that you can do as a warm-up before you get onto the bench, just to kind of take advantage of that short-term effect of these kind of mobility things, whether it be a foam roller, whether it be any gadget out there, some kind of stretch or dynamic warm-up specific to the area. We're going to get that nice little short-term window of improved range of motion, decreased decreased pain, perhaps. And then once we have that short benefit, we get under the bar, and it may help us lift a bit more with less pain.
Man, those were quite a lot of interesting things and a lot of things that came to mind as you were speaking. But I think we need, well, at least I'd like to circle a little bit back to education on itself and to actually understand how have we, as human beings, studied and understand pain on itself. And what I'm referring to is the biomedical model and then the biopsychosocial model, because you alluded to a lot of this in your response, but I'd like to address the importance that we as trainers, not only as practitioners, but as trainers, as lifters, I'm sorry, to understand that pain can not only be because you have your bone right here sticking out, you know, maybe that can hurt a little bit, but what came to mind to exemplify a little bit of that, I recall a little bit of an anecdote. The grandfather of my best friend, one time he broke his rib cage, but he didn't know. So he felt a little bit of pain, discomfort. He went to the hospital. Oh, sorry, you have you have broken ribs. He didn't know. He kind of didn't care even. And on the other hand, we have people like myself, perhaps in training, that I feel a little bit of discomfort. I get worried. I get anxious, and how my pain is different from the one that it's actually from an injury, from something bad happening to the tissue. And how can the biopsychosocial model, which I know it's a little bit on itself dated, I think it's from the 70s, how can it help us understand when we feel pain? What does this pain mean? And what are the other co-founders for pain? Because the last thing I want to mention before giving you the microphone, Nick, it's that in pain on itself and in training, it has a lot of regression to the mean. That perhaps we begin to train, we feel pain, we feel less pain, and then we're back on the pain. And the way we understand the pain, going back to the regression to the mean, can be a little bit stressful. Well, can be quite stressful, can be super frustrating. And by understanding the nature of pain, I think that as lifters can be of really great help.
That's a great question. And I think I'll start. just by commenting on that generation, your friend's grandfather, they are simply built differently.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's growing up like in the World War II times in the United States anyway, or what it is, but my grandfather, God rest his soul, he's since passed. When he had to be like 83. And this guy's like carpenter his whole life, like old school Italian guy. Like you shake his hand and like you got to get an X-ray on your hand to make sure that it's not just like dust. He fell down 18 steps into his basement, did a forward flip and cracked his head on his basement floor, went to the hospital. I kid you not. His head looked like a watermelon that had cracked,
Jesus
like,
Christ.
and they stitched his head up, literally stitched his head up. And I go in to go to see him. Like my family's there. I'm like, hey, like, Pop, like, how you doing? He's like, Nicky, to be honest with you, like, I got a little bit of a stiff neck. I'm like,
Yeah.
stiff neck. So yeah, man, those guys are built differently. Um, and then one thing I wanted to just comment on with regression to the mean is so basically regression to the mean is the idea that most things will kind of get better with time. Like as intense as pain could be, it's usually not a 10 out of 10, 24/7. Usually with doing nothing and just living, our bodies will kind of bring us back somewhere to the average. Um, and that's a big thing in this field of physical therapy and pain and injury management because that opens the door to a lot of um, claims that maybe don't actually work. So if you have someone who, I will use low back pain, for example, someone has some low back pain, maybe some pain that radiates down to their leg, and they go to a holistic practitioner who waves crystals over their lower back and they realign their chakras and lo and behold the person goes there 3 times a week for 3 months. They overall they pay $6,000 for this treatment and they feel better. Excellent. It must have been the crystals. However, we don't know that if that person would have just existed on planet Earth, if that pain would have subsided anyway, because we always kind of regress to that mean. So that's the issue, I think, with my field is that it's hard to pinpoint what actually works, and that opens the door to a lot of quackery,
Yeah.
I guess. Kind of like bodybuilding, right? Like you have a genetic freak who they walk too close to a dumbbell rack and they get bigger. But then you say, what do you do? Like, what's your program like? And they're like, oh, well, what I do is like I slap pieces of tilapia on myself, and then I go take a bath with like these rare mushrooms that I found in like Southeast Asia, and then it's like, oh my God, like that's the key to this person's success, when really it's not. So that's something to look out for. Is always keep in mind what is actually working. And it kind of keeps me humble and practitioners humble because we know, okay, great, this person who's under my care is feeling better and better as the weeks go on. I want to make sure that that person knows that you're doing this. I'm just guiding you. You're doing this. You're following my instructions, and you're giving me feedback, and we're changing as we go, and you're feeling better. Excellent. Like I'm just your guide here, but you and your body are pretty much the ones that are doing this process. So that was just something I wanted to mention about regression to the mean, and your question about the biomedical view on pain versus biopsychosocial. Basically, the biomedical model is have pain, diagnose structure that's causing pain, fix structure, get out of pain. So it's like looking at our bodies like a car. If your brakes are squeaking, we're going to go to the brake pads, we'll replace them, and the car doesn't squeak anymore. Similar to like like orthopedic surgeons. The knee has arthritis. We're going to fix the knee with a fake knee, and they're not going to have pain anymore. That works sometimes, and it gets some people better. like you said, some instances when the bone is coming out of their elbow, I'm not about to ask them like their interpretation of pain and like what like their sleep quality and like how are your stress levels? And they're like, oh, my stress levels are great. Like my bone is coming out of my arm. Maybe you should try meditating. Maybe that will help. So there's always extremes, right? That would be one extreme where like if that was me, I would be like biomedical model, like hello, like come treat me.
Yeah, man.
But other times, and this is the majority of the time, is when we have this kind of gradual progression of the pain that kind of comes and goes, won't go away, and what we found is kind of like I said in the beginning, is that we really can't isolate it to one structure or even a handful of structures, because what we see is that we could have pain with or without tissue damage, and we could have tissue damage with or without pain. So it's almost like if we, like around Halloween, like the haunted houses where you go into like an old broken down building and there's a bunch of people dressed like clowns and one guy has a chainsaw and there's like things that drop from the ceiling. And the first time you go through that house, you're like really tense because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if something's going to jump out at you. You don't know. You felt something on your leg, but you really didn't. Something's crawling on your back and like nothing is there, but you're just so tense that you just think something's going to happen. You go through once, you go through twice, and in this weird example, maybe you go through 20 times.
Yeah.
That 20th time, you're going to be walking like you're walking through a park on a Sunday morning because you know that's the clown with the blood on his head, the guy with the chainsaw is over there, the spider drops over here, and like you start to realize like, oh yeah, like I see the smoke machine behind the curtain, and you kind of just go through with a whole different experience of pain, of the fear of that haunted house. So that's a good example of how this biopsychosocial model of pain can be integrated within our training. So what the approach kind of entails is taking into account prior beliefs about pain, um, sleep, stress, recovery. That all plays a big role in this. So our haunted house example, really strange example, but just bear with me here. Say you had an experience where you went to a haunted house and there was actually a serial killer in the haunted house. And you were there and you watched him just completely slay like the person in front of you. You ran out, saved yourself, cops came, arrested the guy, and it was this big story all around the world that was heard, this big, like awful tragedy. If you go into a haunted house again, you're really going to have a different experience than someone who's only had happy experiences going through those houses. Just like if you have pain, you may have prior beliefs about pain. Maybe Uncle Steve has had low back pain his whole life, and he's got a bad back. And every Thanksgiving, well, that's an American holiday, every Christmas, he sits at the table and talks about his bad back. And now you develop back pain, and all of a sudden, you've identified yourself as someone who has a bad back. Maybe there's a genetic factor. Maybe I'm just doomed to be like Uncle Steve. Was it Steve? I forget what his name was. Maybe I'm just doomed to be like Uncle Steve around a table, and I'm going to have back pain for the rest of my life. So that's a prior belief that has to be taken into account. So one of the questions I ask people is, what do you think about your pain? Like, how is this affecting your life? What do you think about it? What do you think the issue is? And then people will share those things with me. I've had middle-aged to older woman one time coming with back pain, and I asked her, how are you doing in general? Like, I know this is pretty debilitating, but what does it all mean to you? And she shared with me that her daughter had just had a baby, and her daughter's mother-in-law, so the other grandmother of the baby, was this real in shape woman who ran 5Ks and went to the gym and very much in shape, and very active, and she could really play with the baby, get on her knees, jump up in the air, throw the baby up in the air, and this woman I was treating kind of felt like she her back pain was causing her to not be the best grandmother that she could, and she felt insecure because of the other grandmother. And so it's almost impossible to help this patient without knowing that, because that's the baggage that's coming into the situation. So that's why it's important to understand the prior beliefs about pain, who this person is as a whole, not just as a body part. Um, so once we have that conversation, the way that we go about it is through graded exposure. So just like the haunted house example, we're going to gradually work up to the thing that's painful. So kind of like we talked about, finding the smallest modification to the movement pattern that we can do pain-free. What we're doing is we're gradually exposing that area to that sensitive motion. And the more that we do that, the less and less sensitive it will become. So just like walking through the haunted house over and over and over again, the more that we do that in a controlled way, the better, and the less of a response you'll get. So another example would be if someone has a fear of heights, um, the way to get over that is not to avoid any heights. You're not going to feel the stimulus. You're not going to feel that. You're not going to feel that response of anxiety, but you're also never going to get over your fear of heights. Just like not going to the gym, you may not feel pain, but you're not getting better. You also don't want to do the other extreme where you say, okay, close your eyes. Let's go to the top of the Empire State Building and open them. That would probably have the opposite effect. That would make that fear of heights even worse than it was prior to that. That's like saying, hey, my shoulder hurts when I lift up a 25-pound dumbbell. You know what? Give me the 50s. Let's go. That's probably going to make that more sensitive, which is not what we want. So what you want to do is you start on the second floor of the Empire State Building. You go over to a window, and maybe that person feels a little bit of a heart race, but then it relaxes. And they're okay with that second floor. And they're good with that for like a week. And soon enough, they don't have that heart race anymore. Now we go to the third floor, and they get that familiar feeling again, but then it dissipates. And then we go to the fourth floor and the fifth floor. And over weeks and weeks and months, we don't have that response anymore. That's the idea of graded exposure. You don't want to avoid the painful movement, but you don't want to just slam into it. You want to gradually work into that. And that is what the biomedical model doesn't really take into account for. If we're just looking at what structure needs to be fixed, let's fix it. We're missing all of the prior beliefs, what they're coming in with, their recovery, their sleep, this gradual graded exposure to the movement patterns. And in the end, the biomedical model tends to make patients and athletes feel dependent on the practitioner or dependent on the scalpel or the surgery. The biopsychosocial model puts the athlete at the top. The athlete is the one that's helping themselves. And like I said before, the practitioner is just a guide. We're just helping them through the process, giving them reassurance and guiding them through the process. So the biopsychosocial model tends, in my opinion, to create more independence, and the biomedical model tends to make people more dependent. And the goal is to become more resilient over time. So in this instance, if you have this person who had a biomedical approach to their pain. They had pain, they got surgery on their shoulder, and they recovered, and their pain is better. Now, 10 years later, when pain pops up again, they're going to go right back to their doctor, and they're going to think that they need another surgery. Contrast that with the biopsychosocial model. If someone has gone through this process like we're talking about, we've talked about their prior beliefs, how that could impact pain. We've talked about graded exposure. They've gone through the process of regressing that movement a little bit, progressing it little by little through graded exposure, and their shoulder felt better. 10 years from now, they may not even reach out to me because they may say, you know what, before I reach out to Nick, what I want to do is I want to try the same approach we took last time. Let me just understand that pain is not always something bad. Let me see what thoughts I'm bringing into this, and then let me just try to regress the movements. Let me try to make some modifications to my training and see if that works. So there's this calm, kind of cool, collected approach to the pain, and most of the time that does the trick. That does the trick. And then if that doesn't work, obviously then I'm there to help with the process again. But that is the goal of the ability to have a long-term lifting career, right? Jeff Albert's doing his thing at his age, even like Alberto and Eric, and many, many more examples. The goal is to create that athlete that is able to do this stuff on their own. And that builds that kind of resiliency, which is ultimately the goal that we want. So the goal is not to be pain-free. The goal is to have this understanding of pain, know some tools to throw at it. And when pain does creep its head, we know we have a few things to throw at it before we have to, reach out to someone.
Man, I love it. I love the haunted mansion example. To me, it's more than clear. And I have to say, as a brief social commentary, I don't know if Lau, would you agree with this, but living in Latin America, well, it's kind of a haunted house on itself, my man Nick. I have to say, I don't know if it's politically correct, but, but anyway, you have to put it out. And also, you actually perfectly alluded to it. Sorry to take the microphone, Lau. I just wanted to comment on this. There's a study that I actually wanted to mention to you, Nick, that you already alluded. The study, it's from, I have it right here, from Sueki et al. 2023, that actually found that remembering previous experience with pain actually reduced performance in strength sport. I think it was the bench press. But like you mentioned, the experiences that you had with pain and how that was one of your questions, Lau, how your emotions can influence on how you perceive, how you feel and perceive and interpret that pain. And that's one of the things that we as athletes, I think that can empower us to continue with our training and not fear movement. I just wanted to mention that, Lau. I don't know if you have any particular question next.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Nick, for your answer. I think there are plenty of similarities between what you do as a practitioner and what would an evidence-based coach approach a client, like giving this or helping to build this self-efficacy through autonomy. You said something that I think it's really important, making the client the center of their own processes, building this competence through grading, exposure, and when you realize you can have things to do, like you have several options to still training, still doing the thing you love, then there's this reinforcing aspect of, okay, I'm not as bad as I thought I may be. But as Danny said, in Mexico, we, at least from my own experience, I haven't found as many practitioners that do that. And sometimes there are other narratives that can go into either the physicians, the practitioners, and the lifters, sometimes coaches themselves. Things like, you hurt yourself because of your technique, or you hurt yourself because you have this asymmetry and your left shoulder, for example, is higher than the right shoulder, things like that. And I would like to ask your opinion about this, like how related is it really, the technique aspect, the asymmetry and imbalances in the developing of the pain?
It's a really great question. And it's very similar in the United States. That's the majority of kind of what happens. And again, I don't think it's people that are deliberately being dubious or trying to trick people. I just think the field has to level up a little bit and kind of get more in tune with more of the current evidence. But so as far as exercise technique goes, I can't say that it doesn't matter at all, because it does. And like we said, there's a spectrum, right? There's the bone popping out of the elbow. But when it comes to technique, I like to think of it as it was once said by Adam Meekins. He's a physical therapist over in the UK. very, very entertaining. If you ever watch his stuff, just don't have any kids in the room because he does use some profanity, which kind of gets his point across very well. But anyway, he said he has what's called the vomit test. And as long as what he's watching doesn't make him want to vomit, he's pretty much okay with the technique. So as long as someone doesn't look like a newborn baby giraffe when they get under the bar, their legs are like shaking and like it's just like, oh my goodness, like I have to make it stop. What's important with technique is that you build up to it over time. So the more that you do something, the more that your body will adapt to it. And if there's one thing that makes humans humans, it's not necessarily survival of the fittest. It's who can adapt the best. And we've been adapting for as long as we've been on the planet. So when it comes to exercise technique, if someone has deadlifted for 20 years with a rounded lower back, then their body has become so exposed to that movement that it's almost protective to do that because they've gradually worked up to it. And if I could snap my fingers and magically put them in a neutral spine, whoever knows what that is, but if we could magically put them in a perfectly neutral spine, they would probably get hurt because their body's not used to that. Now, the problem, I think, is if we take that person with the deadlift with the rounded back, if they've don't have much experience deadlifting and they go load the bar up with their max and round their back and go to pick the weight up, perhaps that could be a problem, not because rounding your back is bad, but because they haven't gradually worked up to that. They haven't gradually exposed their spine to that range of motion under load. So as long as you are doing something over and over and over again, and it's not painful and it feels okay and you're getting good stimulus, keep doing that. And again, there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum. You want to make sure that your technique allows you to hit the muscles that you want to hit. So if you're trying to focus on your quads during a squat, you probably don't want to have like a big power lifter stance where it's very hip dominant and it's a big like hip hinge forward and your legs are real wide. You probably want to do maybe like a heel elevation and keep it real like upright, like Dr. Mike Israetel, like just really like calf to hamstring, like deep knee flexion. If you want to focus on your quads, if you want to focus on a different part, then alter your technique for that. But as far as injury risk goes, as long as you're doing the same thing progressively over time, your body will become adapted to it. The other time when I would want to tweak form, so the one time would be to bias a different muscle group, or to maybe achieve a lengthened position by changing up the technique. The other time would be if someone were competing in powerlifting or Olympic weightlifting. In those instances, there is a right way to do it because the physics of it, like the lever arms and like where the load is coming from, at the end of the day, if you deadlift and the bar is away from your body, you're probably not going to be at the best mechanical advantage as if you let the bar slide up your shins and be real close to your body. Olympic weightlifting is similar to like gymnastics where every like inch of movement is so specific to be as efficient as possible to lift that weight from point A to point B. If that's the case, then I would say you really want to focus on your technique. And if that's also the case, don't come to me for that because there are coaches that focus only on Olympic weightlifting and they know the intricacies of how to pull, when to shift your weight, when to drop down and catch the bar. So I would say go to someone that really is an expert in that kind of technique. But other than those two things, when you're trying to optimize performance and move a weight from point A to point B, or powerlifting, if it's simply hypertrophy and we're just doing these movements to get stronger, get bigger, then I would say you have a lot of freedom with your technique as long as it passes the vomit test and it hits the muscles that you want to hit and it's not painful. And as far as asymmetries in our hips, in our legs, asymmetries in our technique. Maybe one foot in a squat is pointed out a little bit. Maybe one arm on a bench press is a little bit like our elbow is a little bit closer to our body, and maybe the other arm is a little bit out like that. All that is totally fine. If you feel that stimulus more in your chest with a bit of an asymmetrical grip and it's pain-free, keep doing it. Same thing with the squat. If your foot position feels better, you can connect with your muscles better with a bit of a crooked foot or different from side to side, do it. You're not going to cause yourself damage by doing something like that. Think about the amount of things that we do that are symmetrical. Basically nothing. We never do anything. We have one arm that's dominant. We open doors with one arm. We usually drive with one arm. We eat with one arm. Forget if you've ever played a sport. If you've ever played baseball, imagine the asymmetries that you've built up over the years of throwing a ball with just one arm, or swinging with maximum force in simply one direction with your spine, or golfing, tennis. All of these things are asymmetrical. We're meant to be asymmetrical. People have one leg that's bigger than the other. It just tends to happen. Our bodies adapt to it over time. People have shoulders that are a bit higher than another. Totally fine. People adapt to it. Our bodies adapt to it. Similar conversation about posture. Posture kind of gets this bad rap where forward shoulders or sitting. I've heard sitting is the new smoking. Um, I don't know who comes up with these things, but when it comes to posture, it's not important that we walk around in perfect posture all day long. What's important is that we're able to move in and out of postures. So rounding your shoulders forward feels great sometimes, and then it doesn't. And then you have to stand up, and then like leaning back over your chair and stretching your chest. So, oh my God, that feels so good. But then when you sit up straight for so long and you just like slouch and put your elbows on the table, man, that feels great. Same thing with sitting. Sometimes sitting feels fantastic. When you've been walking around Disney World for 9 hours, like I just did with my family in November, sitting down like on a bus, oh my God, you have no idea. Like sitting down or waiting for a ride or something, it's like, oh my God, I never want to stand up again. Uh, but the same thing goes if you're in a long movie in a movie theater or a long car ride and you're in the car for 3 hours and you stand up and you're like, oh Lord, up above, I never want to sit again. So it's not that sitting is bad. It's not that standing is bad. It's not that rounding your shoulders is bad. It's not that sitting up straight is good. It's just a position that our body can adapt to. So what's important is that we change our positions often. Not obsessively, like it's okay to stay in a position for a certain amount of time, but what's important is that we're able to move in and out of those kinds of positions.
Man, I love it. I kid you not, guys. You make me remember an ad I saw the other day on YouTube, I think it was. That the top reasons why I was sleeping wrong and how can I fix my sleeping because I was hurting myself by sleeping. And yeah, I've seen that sort of content that you're walking wrong, your posture's wrong, you're breathing wrong, everything's wrong, and you need a a course for that. You need a certification to be a good sleeper from apparently nowadays. So this fear of movement that this creates in training and outside training, I think it does way more harm than any good. And that you already alluded to it, and that was one of the questions that we have for you today. But technique, I just wanted to mention it was a review that just got published probably December last year, about what is actually proper technique for hypertrophy. And the short answer was, well, we're not really sure. We're not really sure in the literature, but in social media, we're so sure that this technique is the one for you, is the one that avoids injury, that stimulates the muscle the most. So I find it really both frustrating and funny enough that some people claim to have the solutions for a problem that doesn't even exist, man. So to hear it from you, for me at least, it's such a breath of fresh air, man. I gotta tell you.
Yeah, and again, when it comes to these things, uh, I've been wrong the past. But understanding that I've been wrong and knowing that feeling helps me speak in ways that are not in absolutes. Things like always, never. If I have the solution for you, and all you have to do is subscribe to my email, subscription. Those are the things you want to watch out for. But if something came out where it was really well studied, something like long muscle length training, right? That's like the hot topic now. Um, it's important to take these things with a grain of salt and not just overhaul your training from something that just came out. You want to give it some time, give it some, see if it has some staying power, and if it keeps coming out and keeps coming out. And that's when, even at that point, you could say, if you want to put yourself in the best position to grow muscle, you probably want to make sure that you spend some time in the lengthened position under load. That's it. uh, but I think the issue comes when uh, if the way that we're talking about this subject, there's nothing really tangible. There's nothing really that we can grab onto. There's no quick fix. And if someone is looking for a quick fix, they probably stopped listening 30 minutes ago. Uh, but if I was coming on here with some kind of tool or some kind of series of stretches that will get rid of back pain, I mean, man, that is sometimes that just fills that void that people are looking for, and it's so intoxicating to latch onto those things. And like we said before, a lot of times stuff just gets better. So then it's that positive reinforcement. It's, yes, I put my money to a good choice. It was a great investment. I feel so much better. And then that gets recommended over and over again, and it gets more clicks and more likes. And I always say that the issue with fitness and physical therapy, for that matter, is that the stakes aren't high enough. If this were cancer research, and I mean, people would get arrested for coming out with techniques to treat cancer that didn't actually work, because cancer has a definitive, yes, you have cancer. Hey, you're cancer free. And if people are putting out content that's saying if you drink apple cider vinegar, you will get rid of your cancer, and 100,000 people with liver cancer drink apple cider vinegar and don't get chemotherapy or radiation therapy, that's a big problem. And that, I can guarantee you, that will not last because people are dying. The problem is that the stakes aren't that high in physical therapy and fitness. What's the worst that can happen? Someone doesn't grow a half a centimeter of their bicep because they didn't train in the lengthened position, or they got better with their back pain, but it came back later. Like, it's just not enough. The stakes aren't high enough to really crack down on these groups that kind of put out this kind of information. So I think if it was doing real harm to people, I think it would stop. But in the end, it's really just not guiding people, I think, the best way possible for overall longevity and resilience.
Yeah, well, I think those are all of those things that you just said are, as I said, there are like really good education tools to have, because as we were saying in the very beginning, it's gonna happen at some point. If it's not happening right now, it's probably gonna come back at some point. And if we build up this confidence, this autonomy, this resilience, we can still do this thing that we love for a very long time. And that would be another question if we have time, Danny, and for me to ask you, which would be the biggest advice, or many advices, if you'd like to share with us, for longevity?
Great question. And I know I keep saying great question, but they really are good questions. Um, the best advice for longevity, I, I would say reframe the way that you're looking at pain and injury. Um, understand that pain, the goal isn't to be pain free. Understand that if you have pain, you didn't do something wrong. It's not necessarily your fault. Sometimes it happens. Um, and the important thing is that if you have pain, it doesn't mean it's the end. It doesn't mean that you can't train. Um, what's important is to understand that it's not always something bad. It's not always something that needs to be fixed. Majority of the time, you can manage it on your own or with the guidance of a physical therapist. Um, and yeah, I would say that's probably the best advice I can give is just to understand that it could happen. It's not always your fault. Doesn't mean that something is broken or torn. And first and foremost, um, focus on ruling out red flags, make sure you're recovering, stress management, um, and then look to find ways to modify your training. If it's not working, it's getting worse, reach out to someone like myself or anyone else in the field. And hey, sometimes I don't want it to come across like there is no use for the biomedical approach because sometimes those things are needed. Sometimes we have someone who, in that example of the person who couldn't bench press and we kept changing the movement, changing, and now we're down to the light TheraBand. In that example, sometimes a referral to a doctor to get an injection, a cortisone injection. The trick. It lowers the pain threshold, decreases that sensitivity, and allows us to load that thing better in the gym. Perfect. That's the best way to use the biomedical approach with the biopsychosocial model. Sometimes it may be a structural thing. Let's try an injection. Let's try some prescription medication, like a steroid, or not a steroid like muscle growth steroid, like a prednisone or something like a steroid, an anti-inflammatory steroid, or a prescription anti-inflammatory, or over-the-counter anti-inflammatory, or maybe surgery. Sometimes surgery is the best option, but it should be the last resort. So I think the biopsychosocial model can for sure work together with the biomedical approach, and sometimes they need each other. And I think that's the best way to look at it. So try conservatively. If it's not getting better, don't be stubborn. Reach out for some help and don't feel ashamed if you have to go the more biomedical approach and get some extra help. Injection, medication, perhaps surgery, because those things are excellent sometimes. The important thing is that if you get those things, you get that medication, you get the injection, you get the surgery, understand that it's just more of a temporary fix, and now it's important to load that tissue once we have that short-term improvement. So yeah, that's what I would say. I think for overall longevity is those things that are probably the most powerful thing that I can give to the viewers. It's what I try to do with my position at 3DMJ. So I'm so thankful, obviously, for the team for giving me that platform, and yeah, and I think that's probably the best thing I could advise.
I'm glad, Nick, you clarified that it's not anabolic steroids because then we're going to have people winning the Mr. Olympia telling us that I had shoulder pain, so I needed some steroids, and I got to first place Mr. Olympia. It happens, it tends to happen, man. So all joking aside, I just wanted to thank you for your time, especially that you lost your voice and you still took the time. For me at least, and I'm sure for Lau too, it's a pleasure. It's a topic that at least I think it's really important to begin to talk a little bit more to address what is pain, what is not pain, what does it mean, how can we treat it, and just with the goal, the ultimate goal of like Lau already asked you to get longevity in the sport because natural bodybuilding on itself can be a super healthy thing to do for pretty much everyone, whether you compete or not. I think it's something that needs to be more in the general population.
Yeah.
So that, oh, go ahead, man. Sorry.
No, I agree. Yep, that's good. Well said.
Yeah, well, from my side, I want to thank you both for this opportunity to talk about this topic that I think, as you said, it should be in the like in the very beginning of the education, not only for coaches but also for lifters. We explain people, for example, when they're going through a fat loss phase, what they're going to experience, that they're going to experience some hunger at some point, that they're going to experience some maybe sleep disturbances, all of these side effects. But sometimes we forget to say, yeah, maybe things are completely pain-free right now, and that's great. We want to have that as long as possible because, to be honest, it's more enjoyable to lift in that way. I think we would all agree with that. But just know that sometimes things can be a little bit tricky, and that's not a big deal. We have all of these resources to navigate those situations, and it's gonna, at the end, build up your education through all of the time that you're training and doing this and becoming, as we have said, stronger and stronger and more resilient.
Yep, very, very well said.
So Nick, just I wouldn't want to take any more of your time. Thanks again a lot for doing this. You are more than welcome in Mexico anytime you want to come. We can schedule something. We can train together. We can do something, man. But you have your home right here. And I hope we can do this again some other time, man.
I would love to. I appreciate the invite to Mexico. Would my two daughters and wife be able to come to? They're 4 years old, 2 years old. Um, they don't sleep at nighttime. They'll have you running around all day long. So you could watch them, and then my wife and I will go to the beach or we'll go somewhere nice.
Bring it on, man. Bring it on. I have no issue at all.
We're ready.
Nah, they're excellent. They always keep me on my toes. But it's something that when you becoming a father has been something that is indescribable. Not unlike bodybuilding, you kind of level up and learn as you go, and yeah. So yeah, thank you guys for the opportunity. Like I said, I'm with 3DMJ, so I'm sure you guys know, the listeners know who they are. If anyone has any questions specific to what we talked about today, feel free to reach out to me through Instagram. I do online consults. We could shoot some messages back and forth. Anything you guys need, I'm here for you.